Today's interview talks about all things plant-based and why plant-based is actually a con. I had the pleasure of interviewing with Jayne Buxton, and we talk about all the plant-based narratives, why it's so popular, why it gets so much funding, how Changemakers has made such a difference in our dietary recommendations or points of view when it comes to eating plant-based foods. Why is it that 2% of the world is vegan and 5% or less is vegetarian, yet most people believe that eating plant-based is the healthiest thing to do? In this conversation, we talk about all of these things. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition, and I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing, and that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Jayne Buxton. She is the author of The Great Plant-Based Con. In this conversation, we talk about why she got interested in this topic, why she decided to research a lot of the information around plant-based diets, and if it's healthy for us, why we have to supplement B12, and if it's even ideal to be supplementing B12. We talk about our genetics and how some of us are not able to break down nutrients from plants, such as vitamin A or beta carotene. And we talk about all of these things and how it's affecting our children. If you aren't sure about why we should eat meat or why we should focus mostly on meat, and you still think maybe plants are super good for us or healthy for us, or that it should be the majority of what we're eating, this conversation is for you. Let's get right into this interview. Hi, Jayne. I am super excited to have you on. I would love to have you share your knowledge and share a lot about your book. It's a great plant-based con. So if you can introduce yourself to the people that are listening and watching.
Sure. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I am the author of The Great Plant-Based Con, as you said, and it is a tongue twister sometimes. And I wrote that book. I started researching and writing that book in 2019. And just went on from there and became a huge project for me. And it continues to be a huge project in the sense that the reaction has been continuous almost since it got published here in the UK 2 years ago and in the US a year ago. I've been talking to people around the world about it. The response has been quite amazing, really. People have been, I think, quite hungry to talk about this topic.
Okay. And then what drove you to write about this topic?
Well, like I said, in 2019, around the middle of that year, I just started to notice how the debate about food and health and the environment had shifted so dramatically towards a plant-based narrative. And suddenly we were being told this repeatedly, that we needed to eat more plants, but worse than that, we needed to eat only plants. And there were a couple of things happened that year. One was that the C40 initiative was adopted by a bunch of cities around the world, including London. And that initiative is one where the mayors committed their citizens to things like eliminating meat and dairy by 2030. So it was a pretty dramatic statement, and I thought that was dangerous, particularly as this would all get implemented first in schools and hospitals, probably. And then the Game Changers also came out, and that hit the world a big time, and people were very, very convinced by that film. And young people in particular were very convinced. And I could foresee a major health crisis if we all went down that route, if we allowed ourselves to be convinced by those messages. And so really, I started researching the book as a concerned citizen and as a mother of young adults. And it was really just, I was an author second, as it were. I was more a concerned citizen, but I just happened to be someone who had experience of writing books and had somebody who could help me get it published, an agent and so forth. So.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that if you look at statistics, only 2% of the world maybe is vegan. And most of those people, there's studies that show within a few years, they go back to eating some level of animal-based products. And then maybe 5% is vegetarian. Yet everyone believes that eating more plants is more healthy. And yet it's such a small subset. And so it sounds like some of what you just mentioned are some of the reasons we think plant-based is so healthy. But, what are the downstream effects of so much of the world, or 95% of the world is not plant-based, but all of
Mm.
us think that's the goal that we should be striving for.
Exactly. So, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. The noise that is being made by the 2% and the 5% is enormous. That noise is, so their voices. So you might think that, those people have, I do believe they have every right to eat the way they want, be vegan if they want, be vegetarian. That's absolutely fine. People should make their own choices. But their message is amplified by the participation in this debate of a whole bunch of other actors. And that's really what I write about is who are those actors? How are they amplifying the message? How are they convincing us that plant-based is the way to go, even though so much of the evidence says the opposite? So, in the book, I talk about the role of the media. Why are they involved? The role of corporations. Why is it that processed food companies think it's a good idea to jump on the bandwagon about vegan diets? And the global elites, people like the WHO and the WEF, why do they support this messaging? And then a church that many people have not heard of, but is very influential, is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, has also been really influential in amplifying the message. So when you take that whole set of factors combined, that answers your question as to why we're being told this so often every single day.
So I had a few guests on that talked about the Seventh-day Adventists. So they truly believe that in order to get to heaven, you have to be plant-based. So I can see from their fervor, it's religion.
Mhm.
But for all the other conglomerates, so media, food, I mean, food, it's obvious it's to make money. But for media, the WHO, these other, is it also a money thing? Is it, I mean, what's in it for them?
I think so. Let's take the media, for instance.
Okay.
The media is partly money. So in some cases, newspapers like such as the one we have in here in the UK that you probably can read, many countries in the world, The Guardian, it's very influential. It ran a whole series of anti-livestock pieces for a couple of years based on funding that it received directly from an animal rights charity in the US, okay? OPP. So that is a case of direct channeling of money benefits the newspaper if they print a certain message. And so that's one example. And we have others, our Channel 4, Channel 4, et cetera, have also received funds. The other thing that I think drives the media is that, they're lacking funding. They don't have time to do proper research. So they do lazy research. So what they're doing is they're taking the press releases from various organizations, academic organizations that are doing studies, and they're taking those press releases at face value. And those press releases say things like, for example, women who are on a vegan diet will live 40% longer. So that's a pretty splashy headline, and it really attracts attention. And there are those ad nauseum every day. But when you dig below the surface of the press release and into the study itself, it really the studies don't say this. The studies do not say, they don't prove the definitive case that they're purported to prove. And so the media, I think, is letting us down because it is not challenging these studies. It is simply letting them out there. And I think that they suffer from the thing that we all suffer from. Everybody knows that plant-based is best. So of course, we're just going to report it that way, right?
Right.
So they're fallible like the ordinary population.
It was interesting. I interviewed Callie Means not too long ago. And so we talked about something very similar to this, except for pharmaceutical drugs. And so I always was under the impression that pharma drugs, they want the advertisement so that the potential buyers, us consumers, will then know about it and then tell their doctor, hey, I want to get on this med. I heard it fixes my X problem. He brought in something different, which I thought was very interesting. And I wonder if it's very similar. But if a company advertises with a media channel or a network, then all they're saying is don't ever talk bad about us. So like I will give you a lot of funding, just don't talk anything about our pharma drug. And I wonder if it's the same thing of like, hey, if Nestle gives us money, and I'm sure sometimes they're like the same parent company, but if Nestle gives us funding, then we won't talk anything bad that may come up about Nestle or any of their products as an example.
I think that is definitely the case. And I think it's not just the media that suffers from that link with the money.
Mm.
It's many of the organizations that make policy recommendations, health recommendations. So diabetes organizations, national health advocacy organizations, they are partly funded by the very same companies that produce the products that will receive an uptick if we all think uptick in sales and profits if we all think that plant-based is best. Because if you think about it, all of these processed food companies produce essentially vegan products mostly anyway.
Right.
You know, they're all based on wheat or corn or and lots of
Boy.
additives and they're basically the same set of ingredients sort of packaged up in a different way, in a different flavor and format for us to eat. So there's so much of this funding. I mean, the diabetes organization here in the UK, the official one, is partly funded by cereal companies and a soft drink, a Britvic, a soft drink company. Now, of course, they cannot say in that context, gosh, it's really sugar that's driving diabetes. They can't say that. They have to talk about balanced diet. They have to soften their message. And therefore, you know, we lose the accuracy in the messaging about what the body really needs, what nutrients it really needs, and what foods are really bad for it.
Sure. We have something very similar in the US with the Dietetic Association. So we all know at this point that soda is like diabetes water, but
Yes.
as long as we say it's permissible in moderation,
Yeah.
it's the inability for us consumers to moderate it, but we think it's okay because we say it's not banned. And just
Yeah.
that little allowance then makes us struggle with it. And I think that's where it's just interesting, all of this stuff. So from a WHO perspective, do you
Yeah.
think it's also because they're funded, or is it, there's a lot of this, oh, there's nefarious reasons why they are, trying to control the population, but do you think it's funding, people are in the leadership spaces are all, in bed together in a sense? I mean, what do you think it is for those higher, bigger conglomerates that are, mandating these types of ways of eating?
You know, I don't have an inside track into the head of the WHO, but I can surmise some things and have surmised some things. And I think it's multifactorial, to be honest. I think it's partly funding. So, for instance, the WHO is very heavily funded by the Bill Gates Foundation. Now, we know that the Bill Gates Foundation is also heavily invested in plant-based meats. And Bill Gates, philosophically is of the view that the methane from cattle is the most destructive force in the world and it must be stopped, and that we in the Western world need to stop eating meat. He's of that philosophical view. He has the money to back it up. He is going to benefit from his investments in the plant-based alternatives. So, hey, presto, you have a conflict of interest, right? So that's part of it. The other part is there gets to be this groupthink at the level of these elites. So the WEF, the WHO, they all are looking at the same science without questioning it. And they're reporting on that as if it is the only science. But really, it's the only science that they have looked at. So, and then you'll get these conflicts within the WHO and within, say, the United Nations. So the United Nations, one element might put out an edict that says that actually plant-based is the way to go. But the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization, is saying something completely different. But their voices are being drowned out by the power of the other elements within the UN. So I think it's very complicated, but it's about once a message is out there, it's very hard for them to pedal back as well. So the messaging started to get put out there around the environmental impacts. You know, it started to get a lot stronger in about 2010. The WHO's study on cancer was quite definitive in terms of the health impacts of meat in 2015, even though that study has been proven to be so deeply flawed, and many people have done dissections of that. But it's out there, and people quote it all the time. And you know, there's that famous quote: a lie is halfway around the world before the truth can have a chance to put its boots on. And that's true. I mean, the lie is out there, and it's really hard to pedal back and to rein it in.
Why do you think, so I'm in agreement with a lot of what you said, but why do you think then that there are people, just, the average individual that says, well, I've eaten plant-based and it's changed my life. And now I
Mhm.
feel so healthy.
I think there are a lot of reasons why different people thrive on different diets. So it's true that we're all genetically made up very differently. And some of us can thrive more on, I would say, plant-based, which necessarily means more carbohydrate intensive because that's where you need to get your protein from higher carbohydrate foods. So they can thrive better on that than others. Some of it has to do with genetic ability to convert certain vitamins. So, for example, vitamin A is a well-known one. Some people lack the ability to convert plant-based vitamin A, so beta carotene, into the form that the body needs. They just can't do it. And my daughter is one of those. She just got tested. She doesn't have the gene. She can't do it. So if she is not having her vitamin A from eggs and meat, from liver, she's not going to get it. So that simplifies and explains, I think, the difference in how bodies process vitamins. So if she's one of those people and she has that inability to convert certain vitamins from plants, she's just not going to thrive on a plant-based diet. There's no question. I think there's another factor too, which is something they call the vegan honeymoon, which is when people switch to a plant-based diet, initially, they might be switching from a terrible ultra-processed food, junk food diet. So they're going to feel better for a while. They're going to feel really great because they've got fresh stuff in their diet. They've cut out the junk carbs and they feel like they're thriving. And I think they may thrive for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but eventually, with a lot of them, those nutrient deficiencies, which are inherent in the vegan diet, will catch up with them. And that's why you see a lot of people switching after 3 months. The honeymoon's even shorter, right? But I don't deny that initially you can feel really great just by simply cutting out the rubbish from your diet.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also think it's just logically plant-based diets miss vitamin B12 and there's
Yes.
other nutrients that are very deficient. And also, like you said, beta carotene doesn't always convert to the retinol version we need of vitamin A. So I always wonder, well, if it's a diet that we were meant to be on, why would there be deficiencies and that we would need to supplement B12? You also talk about how the B12 supplementation, there's something that maybe we are not as known that we may know as much, that B12 supplementation just doesn't always work. If you can explain
Doesn't.
that and how is that impacting? Because I think you also mentioned that children are the ones that are suffering more with B12 deficiencies. And if you can explain a little bit about that.
Yeah. Now, what you've just said is very true, that B12 supplementation doesn't always work for the same reason that lots of supplementation doesn't work. So, for instance, omega-3 in animal food form, in fish form, or in its original food source form benefits the body, but omega-3 supplements don't in the same way in terms of, say, preventing heart attacks and heart disease. Calcium, when you get it from food, is one thing. Calcium, when you get it from a pill, is shown to give you a higher risk of heart attack. So it's clear something is going on in the body, which is we need to be getting our vitamins from a food matrix where they're meant to come from, in the right combination of other vitamins, but also in the right combination of fats and other nutrients, right? So I think that's one of the reasons that B12 is not absorbed in pill form or supplement form in the same way that it is from food form. And it's also, there have been other proposed vegan sources of B12, which it turns out are only providing a B12 analog.
Okay.
So that analog is then fooling the body into thinking it's getting B12, but it's destroying the B12. So they're actually making the situation worse. So if you're trying to get B12 from sort of an unnatural, unknown source like that, you're going to more than likely end up with a deficiency. And what's really concerning as far as children are concerned is, a lot of people say, well, everybody knows about B12, so just take a supplement. Everybody knows about these other vitamins, so just take a supplement. Well, if everybody knows about it, how come we see these levels of deficiency? How come we see, for instance, iron deficiency is another one in vegetarians? So the RDA for vegetarians for iron is 1.8 times the RDA for an omnivore. that is an acknowledgement of the fact that they're not getting enough and they're not getting it in the right form. So they have to eat loads more,
Sure.
right? This is across the board. And with children, there have been a number of studies at nursery school level in Finland, in Denmark, and elsewhere, where they have shown that the children who are raised on a vegan diet are deficient in several nutrients, B12 being and D3 being two of the most prominent. And they have inferior brain development and inferior physical development. So for me, I think it's downright cruel to put a child on a vegan diet. I think as an adult, you do whatever you want and you can align that with your beliefs, and that's fine. But to put a child is criminal.
Yeah, I agree. The other day I was looking through Amazon's books and I was looking for if there's carnivore children's books because that's really what I want to do.
Yeah.
At least support, like a child wearing a Superman cape should be holding a chicken wing or a
Yeah.
drumstick, not always just a carrot. That's how I
Yeah.
felt. And that's the beta carotene argument that you just brought up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's so many plant-based books where with little, and then you see the comments and you see these parents reading these books with little children and sharing how you wouldn't steal the baby fish from the mama and they're part of this school, and they pull those emotions. And ever since we're young, we read about these stories of let's save, like Charlotte's Web, where you're trying to save the pig, and it's prevalent everywhere but I don't want to eat the animal because then I'm a murderer. And there's a lot of that narrative, and it's just so unfortunate because then you see the ramifications in health. And I was plant-based for 12 years. I wasn't fully vegan, but when I was pregnant with my first child, I was eating more of the whole foods versions of plant-based. So I would have the big bowl salads, and I was eating almost a pound of spinach every day. And nutritionally, that should have been more than enough iron. But when I was pregnant and they did my blood work, they're like, you have anemia. And so I said, okay, I'll take an iron pill. And that's what I did my first pregnancy, not knowing or thinking, because I wasn't a nutritionist at that time, that's weird. I'm getting sufficient in my spinach. Why am I not sufficient? And instead, I just listened to my OBGYN and took the iron pill. And so it's just these little things that happen. And thankfully, he's okay. But how many people are really eating plant-based that are younger and then are getting deficiencies that you can never fully correct, even if you're older while you're growing? And it's just so unfortunate.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I have a number of friends who believe that their vegetarian diet in pregnancy has caused some sort of issue with.
I believe it.
And I know that Lily Nichols, who writes so eloquently on this, you probably know of her work. She writes about pregnancy and diabetes and pregnancy and nutrition. And she is adamant that you must have animal source foods during pregnancy if you're going to give your child the best chance. And Dr. Georgia Ede, she also has another good book out. It's just come out called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And she's a psychiatrist with experience of 20 years or plus experience in clinical work, and she is fighting the battle to get people to realize again that children's brains and all our brains actually need animal source foods to thrive. And so I guess that for me the frustrating thing is, and probably for you too, how do we get these messages out there to counteract the messaging that is in schools, that is in the popular press, that is influencing parents? Because that's a pretty well-oiled machine, that's getting those plant-based messages out there. And we're sort of behind the eight ball in trying to get the alternate view out. And it's very difficult to understand how to do it, because every time you do it, every time you talk about it, you get accused, or I get accused, and people like me get accused of, being in bed with the meat industry, or having a sort of conflict of interest of some kind. Now, I don't have any. I have absolutely none. So for me, the argument is just purely from an intellectual point of view, from a concerned citizen point of view, as I've said. But my voice and the voice of people like you and others talking about this isn't quite strong enough. So I don't think we've unlocked the key to converting people. I don't think we've really got the messaging right.
So I've had this question and I've asked it for several of my interviews because it seems like there's so much money behind the
Mm,
plant-based, the
mm,
movies. Bill Gates is a
mm.
gazillionaire. He owns most of the farmland in America now. So how do we fight this big movement? And and then I spoke with a lady named Belinda Fecky who did a lot of the
Oh
research
yeah,
for the Seventh Day Adventist,
yeah.
and she shared a
Love
story. I
Belinda.
can't remember his name, but he worked at a magazine, or he actually was a politician and tried to change some of the dietary recommendations, especially with Coca-Cola having Coke in it. And
Mhm.
so when he noticed that he wasn't getting or evoking enough change, he then moved to a magazine company and then had like a 10,000 mothers march to get it out of the Coca-Cola, and they eventually got it. So what I believe, so sometimes, yes, when I hear all this, I hear about COVID, I'm like, what is the point of us sharing about eat some meat? It's never going to
Yeah,
change. But then I
yeah,
think about the fact that you wrote that book, the fact that Dr. Georgia Ede wrote her book, the fact that I wrote my book. It's these messages. And then as we get people to try the N equals ones, and then people share their own stories, I think it gets to a point where there will be a tipping point. So, yes, we have to understand that maybe as we're eating meat and we start having less brain fog, maybe we can then understand, well, for some reason, I followed exactly the opposite of what they recommend and I feel better. I
yeah,
wonder if maybe some of the media information isn't necessarily true. And then you just start questioning and you start having the ability to question. And then if your neighbor then sees, whoa, you look so good, and you say, yeah, I got off my diabetic medications, or I'm not suffering from depression, because that was me. I had major depression issues and I now have
mm,
none. And if you just share your story, when that person is suffering, they're like, hey, I'm desperate enough. What did you do again? And I think it's that eventually 1 + 1 + 5 plus the exponential increase. And then it's just a tipping point. And I think some people just need to get to a point of, abject misery, to then say, whatever you're doing, let me know. Because that's where I was. I was plant based. I even tried keto, saying, okay, so maybe I need the fat. So then I did plant based
yeah,
plus keto, and I still struggled until I remember that a couple people told me about carnivore. I thought it was absolutely crazy. So I did all of what I heard. So I was plant based, the best student, went to Berkeley, learned about the
yeah,
big bowl salads, and then so indoctrinated. And I got sick, and there was a period I landed in the mental hospital, and then I just realized everything I knew is wrong when I started eating meat and I started healing. And I just
yeah,
couldn't believe it that I had to understand, just like you, just a citizen scientist of like, wait, why did that happen though?
yeah,
When my psychiatrist told me I just was a little broken with my neurotransmitters and all I needed was some medication. And so
yeah,
as I learned, I realized the flaws of, the Ansel Keys studies and the saturated fats and what happened with Eisenhower. And then as we learn and as I share, and yes, it's so small compared to what Bill Gates does. And of course, it seems so unmotivating sometimes, but I think it's truly, if we keep marching and we share the truth, and if these
yeah.
truths actually help people heal, those stories are so powerful and it will be the pivotal moment. And I just think it requires a tipping point. That's at least my belief.
And I agree with you. It
Yeah.
will come. I don't know when it'll come, but it will come. And in the meantime, those of us who believe in the alternative to the mainstream message just keep talking about it. And that's what I do. That's what you do. I talk about it to anyone in my personal life that I have an opportunity to do that with, without being too dogmatic or
Sure.
preachy. I have to wait for an opening, but I'll
Yes.
always take an opening when it's there. And you're right. I think grassroots change is the only way that this goes. And it's the same with, say, treatment for diabetes. The people who have discovered that low carbohydrate eating is the best way to put diabetes into remission,
Right.
they're fighting against a whole world and a whole officialdom that says actually balanced diet's best, eat as many carbs as you like so long as you balance it with something else. They are fighting that whole school of thought.
Right.
They may not change that school of thought, but they'll change the people who are listening to it. So that's what we're just about, the people, aren't we? We're about the people. And the American Heart Association is never going to, well, not in my lifetime, I don't think. It's not going to change its official point of view on its various pronouncements. Neither is Harvard Business School. It's going to
Right.
keep on pushing the plant-based messages. the anti-cholesterol messages. It's the people who are listening to it that we have to change. And I laugh every time I get another email from Harvard in my inbox. I just think, oh, crikey, what are they saying now? Because it's invariably very, very biased stuff, very weakly supported. But there's a lot of people out there who probably believe that's the ultimate authority, And so any opportunity I have, I prick that bubble and tell people that it's not.
Right. And it is hard because all of these conglomerates, even these schools, they're funded by outside sourcing that oftentimes are, in the plant-based world. And I know we think universities should be not biased, but they're businesses. At the end of the day, get enough people to go into their school and then their alumni pay back. I mean, we get emails all day long or messages from Berkeley saying, please support us. And I don't want to because they're much more plant-based. And it's all of those things that as a business, they need to stay in business. And so they will support, I think, who they get funded by. And I think it was Rockefeller, I believe, that created the American Heart Association or supported the creation of it so that they didn't get in trouble with their petroleum medications. And it was this conflict of interest to cover that up.
There was that, and then the support by Procter & Gamble. So Procter & gave the first big chunk of money from a corporation as well. And so, I mean, it was small fry money in today's terms. It was 1.7 million, I think. But in those days, a lot of money and a lot of credibility given by that. So, you're quite right. So they can't pedal, the American Heart Association can't pedal back from that. So we just have to accept that and we work on another level. But I had a very interesting, sometimes this whole debate gets me into trouble publicly, but it often gets me into trouble with people that I know, with friends. And I had an experience recently where I was at a dinner and we weren't even talking about food, but a friend said, he just exploded and said, how can you possibly be saying what you're saying? You have to be wrong. My son says you're wrong. And I went, oh, really? Well, tell me where I'm wrong. Turned out his son works for one of these lab-based, new venture capital funded lab-based meat companies. They, of course, have drunk the entire Kool-Aid.
Of course.
Right? They have to believe that meat is terrible for you and terrible for the environment because their whole business model is predicated on eradicating meat and replacing it with this new product, right? So we got to the bottom of this, and this fellow was so angry, and I could see where he's coming from. This is an emotional thing. He wants to believe his son. He wants his son to do well with his new business. And I said to him, okay, let's take this apart a little bit. Let's look at how much of the world's emissions, global emissions, are caused by meat. Let's start there. Do you have a number in mind? No, I don't know. I just know it's a lot. I said, okay, so you're telling me I'm wrong, but you don't have a number in mind. That says to me that a lot of people are fighting this argument from a knee-jerk, emotional place. They don't have the data. They've just been told that it's wrong, so they're attacking because they don't have anything else to go on. So this is what I think we face every day, and maybe you faced it when you tell people about carnivore. They must say, you must be crazy, right? They probably think you're crazy. You just have to tough it out. You have to get the data and throw it quietly back at them. And I think that's just our job, really, now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I also think the average mom that I'll come across, and if they're more plant-based, if they ask me questions, I could share content. But what I've noticed is when you get into statistics and numbers, they seem to glaze over a little bit with the methane versus carbon emissions versus, actually the cow farts and versus the EPA data numbers. I see the glaze over in the face. But if you say, if you make it more emotional back, so if your child the brain grows rapidly until the age of 5. And then beyond that, it grows until pretty much age 24. But the brain is 60% fat. So then imagine if you're not feeding your brain enough fat. And so that to them logically makes sense. So then when you start saying, where most of that fat is from animal foods. And if you think about how do we render tallow versus how do we get canola oil? And so I've noticed that if I just use more logical arguments, it gets people to think, right? Like 150 years ago, there was no canola oil, but we think canola oil is the best. So why do we think that? Heart disease didn't really exist 150 years ago. So how does that make sense that this new oil is going to fix a issue that was never existing before when it was only tallow? And it's the questioning that I leave them with, that they're like, instead of me going, no, meat is good, plant bad, because that never works, because the initial reaction of human behavior is you're challenging my thoughts and then I am going to be against you. But if you just say, well, have you ever thought of this and that? And I think that's when if I could leave them with that, and then they can do their own research. And then even just bringing in modern diseases of how come we have so much autoimmune that never existed when we were younger? Bringing up these things I've seen has been the most beneficial, so that they're willing to be open and not be glazed over by facts, which I love, but not everyone does.
You're right. You have to pick the right facts. And I think it's those questions, those probing questions. You're absolutely right. And you brought up one earlier, which is, how is it that we're not supposed to be eating animal foods when B12 only comes from animal foods? Would nature have designed it that way?
Right.
No, probably not. So it is those single issue, those points that do have impact on people sometimes.
Right. You mentioned how during the Eisenhower days, they were trying to figure out why was this heart disease becoming prevalent. You mentioned Ansel Keys in the studies, but you also mentioned before that there are other researchers that were there that said, no, actually, it doesn't really align, that it's saturated fats. We also know that Ansel Keys removed or cherry picked certain countries to not be part of his results to make his studies seem more powerful. And then there's also other clinical studies that showed that it actually didn't hold up. Why do you think those studies or researchers have just been like, no, and it was Ansel Keys that got the limelight, that his...
Well, those that knew Ansel Keys and those that have researched him on a personal level and in depth, and Nina Teicholz is one of those, the Big Fat Surprise author. She did a lot of research about Ansel Keys in particular, and power of personality has something to do with it. And also first in there, right? You're first in there with your theory. It's like the lie that gets around the world before the others have a chance, sort of thing. So I think that those are two reasons. And then there's a little bit of skullduggery, which also influences it. So the studies that you're talking about, which are the early on, the Minnesota coronary study, the Sydney diet heart study, both of those proved the opposite of what Ansel Keys was saying, but they were never published until decades later. So they were sort of hidden. And in one case, the Minnesota coronary study, it was literally hidden in a garage. The real results were hidden in a garage that were discovered later. So, once you get that combination of events, which is very influential, charismatic person, very strong person, some say bullying person who suppressed the alternative points of view of John Yudkin, for instance, then you get the manipulation of the evidence in that way. You've got a pretty powerful engine there that's driving a particular perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I see it sort of in the wellness industry, to be honest. The salesman, the person that's the most dynamic, that's the most convincing. They can bring up studies, and then if you actually look at the studies itself, it's questionable what they're arguing, but they're so convincing, and they have an MD behind them, or they're a doctor, and so then you believe fiber is needed for health, or that saturated fat is bad and all you need is olive oil or some other seed oils because they reduce your heart. And it becomes very convincing because they're really great actors in a sense. And so I can see that happening with Keys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
In terms of the saturated fat, you talk about epidemiological studies. Maybe if we could talk about what is an epidemiological study, and then, there's a lot of, in all of those studies, they say, for the most part, again, that plants equal better health. Why do you think that happens with these studies? And then what are these types of studies?
So epidemiology is really another word for observational.
Mhm.
So what they do is they track a certain population over time, and they track the outcomes, the health outcomes of that population, and they also track supposedly some of the things that they're doing or eating, right? And they try to correlate, and they find associations. So an association might be, okay, the people who ate more plants had a 0.95 risk of heart attack versus the people who didn't eat so many plants. So they'll generate that kind of result. There are a number of issues with those studies. The primary one is that they are only observational. So they're tracking many things at once, and therefore it's very difficult from that observation to derive a causal relationship. It's difficult to unpick all the other confounding factors which might be there and therefore causing this result to be seen. The other one, which is very, very typical with, particularly with the plant-based argument, is the healthy person confounder. So your listeners probably know what this is, but it's always worth a refresher, which is, if you find that the people who ate the plant-based diet did better in some health way, by some measure, that may be the diet that did it. It might also be the fact that those people who eat plant-based are more likely to exercise, to have quit drinking or drink very little, to not smoke. They may even be wealthier and therefore have benefit of better health care. So there are all these confounders, the healthy person confounders, which is why we so often see that slight edge to plant-based in these kind of observational studies. But the other weakness in those studies is that they're based on food frequency questionnaires, where you ask somebody, what did you eat? How much of this did you eat? And you then build your picture of their diet on that. Now, very often, they only ask the people once. They ask them maybe at the beginning of the 10-year study. And then 10 years later, they're assuming that they're eating exactly the same way, or so that's one of the issues. The other issue is, can you even remember what you ate? Can you remember what you ate yesterday, last week, last year? Most of us can't remember what we ate, let alone how much of it.
Right.
So the very basis of these studies seems to me to be completely flawed. I think if I had my way, we would eradicate the current format of epidemiology in nutrition and start again. We've got to find a different way of looking at food and its effects, because the current industry, the epidemiology industry, is running amok.
Right.
It is everywhere. It is well funded. It is producing nonsense, absolute nonsense. And that nonsense is doing more harm than good.
Right. And I can attest, we have a practice that's our main business, but we use food and mood journals because people can't even remember what they ate yesterday for lunch unless they're eating the same exact foods, which some people are on a carnivore elimination diet. But generally speaking, they don't remember. They can remember sort of what they ate, but to say 10 years, that's wildly misinformative. But the question I always wonder is, all the other animals in the world seem to sort of know what they need to eat. And we are some of the most intelligent, yet we don't know what to eat. And is it because of these studies? Like, when did we not know what to eat?
Such a good question. And there's a fellow who writes about this, Fred Provenza, who is he's a professor emeritus from Utah University, but he's written a great book called, gosh, I'm going to forget the title now, Nutritional Wisdom or something like that. Anyway, Fred Provenza is the key thing to remember.
Okay.
And what his work showed is that animals, as you say, seem to know what they need. You put them in a pasture which is diverse, has lots of different kinds of plants. They will find the plants that they need in the right amount to cure whatever ails them, or to meet whatever nutrient deficiencies they have. So, and he also cites the research of Clara Davis, which was done back in the 1930s, was very interesting with babies, a certain group of babies that she had in her care. When she placed them at a table on a daily basis with a choice of lots of whole foods, they would each choose to eat lots of different things, that no child ate the same thing and no child ate the same thing every day. But it ended up being that each child ate what they needed. So this is nutritional wisdom, which we do have if we will listen to our bodies. But I think that we've allowed so much noise to get between us, between our brains and that nutritional wisdom. We have the noise of the ultra processed food that we see in the supermarket, which is confusing us and telling us we should eat that or that. It's interfering with that messaging. We have the noise of dietary organizations, environmentalists, other people who say this is what you should be eating. So we have lost the ability to listen to our body, to listen to its signals, and to just simply eat what we feel we need. And wouldn't it be a great world if in fact, I was talking to Fred Provenza about this. We said, you wouldn't need dietary guidelines if we just tapped into that nutritional wisdom, because each person would know what they needed to eat. Their bodies would tell them.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in our practice, we try to use that. The symptoms are your biggest indicator. So the perfect example I always give is if you smell rotting meat, you know exactly how that smells and you know exactly how your stomach turns. That's your innate wisdom. We need to lean on into that more for like everything else that we do with foods and decisions. But the first thing people always want is, but I want labs. I want a test that says I'm deficient or sufficient or there's a problem. And it's the symptom part is the most undervalued piece from all of our clients. And when we're saying that that is the most important, they're like, but that's just symptoms. I want the data. I want my blood work to say, no, you are healthy, or your micronutrient test or my poop test to say you are free of illness. And it's just fascinating because I agree. I think we are so indoctrinated by so many different facets instead of actually you should just trust your body. And if you have an ache, it's likely a sign that there's something going on. And if you want something, there's probably an indication of why you want that food. Maybe there's a certain ingredient in, or a micronutrient in it. So I fully agree. So if we maybe were to say we agree that a lot of the plant-based information is incorrect, at least from a nutritional perspective, then the people will all say, well, what about the environment? The environment of the cow farts are, or the burps are making too much methane, and the planet's overheating. Look at all the overheating caused by all of the animals. So we can do a service to our future generations by eating less meat. What about that narrative? Is there any merit in that?
Well, I think that narrative has been distorted in the very same way that the health narrative has been distorted. So how has it been distorted? On many levels. I think the methane emissions from cattle are greatly exaggerated. They are also constructed, I'm going to just run through them quickly now, those emissions are calculated using a metric which overstates the impact, the climate impact of cattle versus, say, industry. The IPCC acknowledges that. So that metric is GWP 100 instead of GWP star. So that's another way that it's exaggerated. The other thing that happens, you'll see this often in studies, is foods will be reported as having a certain carbon emission load per kilo of food or per calorie of food. This is always the way it's reported. But we don't eat kilos and calories. That's not what sustains us. It's nutrients. So when you re-evaluate the carbon emissions on a per nutrient basis, you find that animal foods and plants are much more mixed up in terms of which causes, some of them cause carbon emissions greater than others, but it might be true of plants and animals, and they're much more equalized in terms of the damage they do in terms of carbon. But what we're fighting here is a battle of non-information or wrong information. So again, at a recent social event, I was with a bunch of young people and we were talking about this. And I said, as an experiment, I said, by the way, what percentage of global emissions do you think comes from cows? And they were giving me numbers like 75%, 55%, these are big numbers.
Right.
And I said, well, let me tell you that the real number is 14 or possibly 11%. So the latest number coming out of the FAO, GLEAM, they call themselves, is 11%. This is such a vast difference, right? Such an incredible overstatement in popular consciousness. that it's no wonder people are panicking. And then you start to say, well, actually, that's true globally, and it's globally for lots of reasons. But if you look in an industrialized nation like the US or the UK, it's even less than that. So the emissions are, in the US, the emissions from beef are 2% of the total. So this could be one of your little pieces of logic that you give people, which is, how is it possible that if emissions in the US from beef are just 2% of the total, how is it that getting rid of those is going to fix the problem? Tell me, how is that? Because it's just not. And in fact, studies have shown that having the whole of the US turn vegan would reduce emissions by maximum of 2.6%. And that would be at a great nutritional cost, because you just can't make up those nutrients through the plant substitutes. So it's a red herring. I think I know I'm not saying that there aren't important environmental considerations in the way we raise animal foods. There absolutely are. And just this morning in the UK context, there was a discussion on Farming Today, which is sort of my go-to every morning, the show on the radio. They're talking about the effluent from industrial chicken farms, which is flowing into our rivers. That is a real problem. Right. I'm not denying that that's a problem. And so they're calling for a reduction in industrial chicken farming. And I think that that's a very positive move. We need to be farming chickens much more environmentally sensitively, handling their manure, their species in a different way. That may mean it will almost certainly mean eating less chicken. So if you look at what really needs to be done, the irony is probably more beef, less chicken. And yet we get the opposite message from most sources.
Yeah, I think what happens is a lot of the context is taken away. So either from the environmental side, it's the statistic. I mean, they have solid numbers. We don't understand what those numbers really mean. And then they manipulate it and present it in a way that seems so provoking. We don't see the percentages. And you're absolutely right. I actually looked through the EPA 300-page document and found the way they came up with numbers and the 1.8 that it really is. And they combine rice with some of the land that they graze. And there's a lot of this information that people aren't going to spend that time, and you believe the headliners of, well, everyone believes that, so obviously there's truth to it. I mean, how can they have everyone trying to reduce the carbon emissions, and New York is going plant-based once a week for the children, so there must be truth to that. I mean, how could they be wrong when they're the authority? And when we're so busy and we're so plagued by processed foods, and so we don't even have the wherewithal to really think about these things, I just think it becomes easy to just believe and buy into the narrative. But when you look a little deeper, like you said, it's not that we're saying this mega agriculture, the CAFOs are ideal. They're probably not. But it's not that therefore these are bad, so therefore eat plant-based, because monocropping and just eating GMO foods are also not ideal. It's stealing the nutrients and killing all the insects and birds and stuff. But that's how they paint the narrative. But maybe it's more, well, why don't we just go back to natural agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and just leave nature the way it's supposed to be? And then maybe the world would get a little bit better. And I think it's just, they say this is true, which technically it is, right? So technically the chicken feed or the cow feces can cause some of the illness, but it's really, well, then what's the solve? It's not then go process plant-based, because that is not, but I think people just think it makes sense.
So we can agree on the problems out there. It's just solutions that differ. And I think in appealing to people's logic, we would have to say, when has an extreme solution ever been the right one? It's just not that easy, is it? So yes, we have a problem with industrial agriculture right now on the plant side and on the livestock side.
Sure.
You can't eliminate all of it. You have to find a way of doing it differently. Because as you rightly point out, if you eliminate things as a way of dealing with the problems, you pretty much end up in a world with no food.
Right. No, right.
So because if you're a purist, and in fact, the farming movements around the world, the protests that we're seeing in France, in Germany, in Holland, in the UK, we have the movement here is no farmers, no food. And it's true. Now, people are accusing those movements of being infiltrated by the right wing, and there's lots of mud being thrown at them. But that does not take away from the fact that farmers are fed up of being treated like the villains.
Right.
They have been treated like the villains, and they shouldn't be. And without them, and without working with them, what do we think we're going to do? What are we going to eat? It's just crazy.
Yeah. So for a long time, we would go to the grocery store and my children would, we would get meat. So I would go to the farm alone and pick up their raw milk. And so I started taking them with me. And so they would see the chickens and they're like, oh, it's so cute. And I would explain how that becomes food. And it was hard for them to make that connection because we don't want to. We almost want to think we're so humane, we wouldn't eat a different being. But plants are alive too. It's not like they're not alive as well. And I think it's really important to make that connection again. So I have my children help me break down meat now and help us cook and see the egg. And they ask me questions of how come this egg is not a baby chicken right now? And so we explain the fertilization and stuff. But without doing that, we become so removed and we think everything is out of a box. And therefore, we can save the planet by eating these box foods and we don't need the animals or we don't need the farming. And it's just, I think we are so removed from so much of what's natural. And I think the more and more we understand that actually, even for plants to survive, you need the fertilizer of animal feces or it would not survive. And I think when we just think a little more, dig a little deeper, then we will understand that this is all a part of the circle of life, that if I die, hopefully I was relatively healthy. And then inside the soil, I will give nutrients so that then grass comes and then the animals will eat. And it's a perfect circle of life. And I think when we are not sharing this, especially with this next generation, it becomes so desensitized. And then we fight for these things that we don't even understand. And it's so concerning to me because I too have young boys and I want to make sure that they're not having to forage for meat, which is insane, but I think it could be a reality if we don't stand up and share these things.
Yeah, I think it is. And my next project, as it were, which I've been thinking about really continually for the past year, is how to take the message in my book further to young people, to schools, to more people, because that message about where food comes from, why food does involve death of something, and the cycle of death and different animals and the way they contribute to that cycle of death, all of that needs to be discussed in schools, or at least be available for kids or for parents to discuss with their children. And I don't know how to do that yet, but it's something that's definitely on my mind to spend time doing.
Yeah, no, I think it's really smart to think of things like that because I do think it's really important. That's where I was so curious if there was a carnivore children's book out there, or at least a meat focus carnivore. I don't expect children to all be carnivores, and then there really wasn't anything. And I think I found one maybe keto-based children's cookbook at that time, and it's been a couple years, but all the plant-based books for children, I just think we need to combat it by having more books out there that children can read and understand it's okay that I eat an animal, but because I need to be big and strong, and then I can tend to the earth and make sure that we're treating our pets well and treating other animals well and taking care of our land if we are healthy enough. And because one of the biggest industries that causes all of the CO2 emissions and methane is our industrial side, and that includes hospitals. So I just think
that's true. Yeah.
I just think we don't think things through fully. One last question I want to ask is, why do you think there's this big push for insects? Because that's not plant-based, but why is it? I mean, the little I've researched into these mega in places where they grow and harvest these bugs, there's a lot of emissions there too. There's parasite issues, but why is it that they really want us to eat bugs when it seems like it also will cause a lot of nutritional deficiencies and illness?
Well, I think it's the next big thing and they're not thinking it through properly. Just like you said, people aren't thinking through the logic, which is, okay, if that takes off on a grand scale, you're going to have maybe less land use than we have with, say, livestock, but you'll have other resource use. And there's also that question, which is, okay, if you're doing this from a moral point of view, if vegans are doing this, why is a insect any less important than a cow?
Right.
in the grand scheme of things. Why is it okay to eat that animal, that living thing, but not a cow? So I think there's a flaw in the logic. What I am interested in is the use of some insects, so certain types of flies, to feed chickens, because if that can be populated and taken up on a grand scale, that would reduce the need to grow grains to feed chickens, because a lot of the poultry is fed grains, which are grown on deforested land. And that's the real problem when you talk about grain growing for animals. It's mostly poultry and to some extent pigs. So I think that's an exciting avenue to think about, the flies being fed to the chickens. But yeah, I don't understand the cricket thing and the bug thing from a human point of view either.
So do plant-based advocates support these insects? Because I thought they didn't eat it at all, but I'm not sure.
Well, you may be right, except that the purists won't, but
Okay.
those in the middle, so the
Sure.
people who are pushing these new technologies and new sources of food, will be playing on those arguments about it being a less cruel, and more easily accessible, etc. So they'll be playing on those arguments because that's what they do. That's what they do when there's a new technology and some money behind it and a way to change, that they will pull on all the levers to persuade us that that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, in closing, I wanted to share a story. So right after Change Makers, a lot of people watch it because it's on Netflix, it's
Mhm.
entertaining. It was made by the same person that made Titanic, who's like a multi-million-dollar movie. And so it's very cinematic and it's enjoyable. And then you learn, oh my gosh, my blood is going to be different when I eat
Yeah.
plant-based foods. And so then soon after, because I was plant-based for 12 years, so I went to the fast food restaurants and there was really nothing I could eat, so I would get a bun and cheese sometimes if I was really in a bind. And now I see the plant-based patties
Mhm.
everywhere, and they're like $2 more than the
Mhm.
typical one. And if you look at the statistics of who eats most of the fast food, it's sometimes the people with less income, or they're in a
Mhm.
bind and they have to eat there. And I just thought about, gosh, like, so many people not knowing that they're being fed incorrect information, and in fact harmful information. They think they'll be doing themselves a better service by ordering the more expensive, so now losing the $2 that they
Yeah.
can use to buy a dozen eggs, from
Mm.
a conventional eggs from the grocery store. And now they're eating that because they think they're making a conscientious difference in their health, but in fact it's hurting
Mhm.
their pockets. And now these people will probably get diabetes. And I just thought of that whole process, and it just sickened me to think
Yeah.
that. And just preying on the people that either don't have time to learn about this, or don't have a ton of money, but they're trying to make small incremental hopes
Mm.
of benefits for their health. And it's just not
Mm.
true. And it's the thing that motivates me to share this information, because you
It is
cannot have a lot
nauseating.
of money and eat ground beef, eggs and butter from just the grocery store, whole
Yeah.
milk, and do so much more of a service. But it's
Yeah.
those exact foods that they say are killing you or causing
Yeah.
heart disease. And it's
That's what's
so heartbreaking that, yeah,
It is heartbreaking. And there's so much marketing behind these plant-based substitutes. And really, there's nothing sexy that can be said about an egg or a glass of milk, right? So you don't have the same sort of power in marketing terms. The only thing that I think is heartening in a way is that we are beginning to see, the crumbling of that alternative protein market.
yes.
So a lot of companies are failing.
Okay.
Impossible and Beyond Burger, they haven't made a profit. They're 10 years in, they haven't made a profit. Sales are declining, restaurants are closing,
Okay.
right? People are not buying it. So, and also because of that price difference, they'll go to Costco and they'll see the difference. You can get a grass-fed steak for less than you can get one of
Yeah.
these alternative burgers. So it may be that economic forces and simple supply and demand sort this whole thing out. Let's watch this space, but it may be that we see less of that in the future, and that we do get a resurgence of the support for the real foods as being the truly nutritious things that you want to eat. There's a very interesting fellow here. His name is Eddie Abu. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a, a nutrition influencer, you could call him, ex-bodybuilder. He catapulted himself from no followers to 3 million at last count. And I'm going to be talking to him at a conference that I'm participating in very shortly in May. But his message is always, don't eat the crap. Don't eat plant-based anything, substitutes. Don't eat packaged anything. He goes into stores and he points all this out. Okay. And he says, eggs. Make sure you eat eggs every day. Make sure you have a little bit of meat every day. There's a couple of other things he's a big fan of, vegetable-wise. So he's got about 5 things that he tells people to eat. And he goes around and he shows them how cheaply they can eat those things. And he's having a big impact, And it's that ground level influence that you were talking about, that you got to hand it to him, that he's just got a simple message. And every day he puts his meal out, which is eggs, and people are copying it. So it's a great thing to see.
Yeah, I think over time, as people just share their stories, it can move. It's sort of like how before all fats were bad, and at least they've now brought in healthy fats, right? So at least avocado for some people, it's okay, or olive oil. So there is a movement, and they did take away that before there was a cholesterol upper limit. So beyond maybe 2 eggs a day, you shouldn't have any more cholesterol. And they've also removed that. So I do think us sharing, and then hopefully other studies come out that share, actually, this is not true data, then it will move it enough. And maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe I'm hoping in our kids' lifetime, it'll be enough where it's like, actually meat is good, but it's just everything around the meat that may not be ideal for you. And it's so simple, but if you just go back to the single ingredient foods, you will most likely, live a long time, as long as you're eating natural single whole food. So I think
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you? Where can people find your book? And if you have any social media followings?
So they can find the book on Amazon or in other bookstores, but Amazon is, I guess, usually the easiest, The Great Plant-Based Con. And they can find me on Twitter at Jayne Buxton. Twitter is where I have most of my conversations. People can reach me. They can DM me if they want. And, I'll respond. If it's a nice DM, if it's abusive, I won't. I'm not on Instagram, just because that for me is a sort of a personal space. Okay. But sometimes, I'm on there via podcasts and whatever. But and I have a website also called The Great Plant-Based Con, so they can find other articles that I've written and things that I do there.
Well, thank you so much for all your research, and just for caring, for having that peak curiosity to understand this all seems kind of crazy, and then looking into it and understanding, wow, there's a lot more stuff about, the things that I had questions about. And now it's, supporting a movement of people that are just trying to get better health, and you give them the science and data to share. Yeah, you're right. Plant-based is probably not ideal for you, and here's the reasons why. So thank you so much for even creating a resource for people to turn to when more of the mainstream media and content is so against what we're sharing. And you see it because when people eat carnivore and their cholesterol goes up, their first thought is a worry of maybe this isn't the right diet. And or maybe the markers are not ideal, and it's just contextualized. So I think the more we share, it's truly important. And I have hope that the world can turn, or the tipping point will occur, so that people can eat the foods that we are meant to eat. So thank you so much.
That's a great way to conclude. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It really sheds light as to why this whole plant-based narrative is so popular, and why it's so front and center, and why eating a meat-based diet gets so much pushback. In this conversation, we talk a lot about the what and why, and how it's all going about. We also challenge a lot of the conversations that we have around global emissions and how animal-based foods are harming the planet. But are they really? And then we also talk about epidemiological studies and how there are flaws. I hope that this information just helps you to have a broader understanding and context of how we've been fed a plant-based con. If you have not checked out Jayne Buxton's book, I highly recommend it. It's very informative. It gives you all the information and insight to understand what all is going on. If you are healing from a meat-based journey, I highly recommend sharing with other people because this is the tipping point we were talking about. We are the David against a big Goliath, and the only way we can win and help the other fellow neighbor is by serving, by sharing our story. If you heal and get off medication with a more meat-based diet, it is so imperative to share that because your neighbor is suffering believing all the plant-based con stories. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.